You can be vulnerable and in an unsafe environment. You can be vulnerable and in a safe environment. The distinction there are the people that you're around, that they've got your back. Hi, and welcome to the Storia podcast where storytellers disrupt. I'm David Noronha.
And I'm Fab.
And before we get started today, please remember to like, subscribe, and give us that 5-star review. Today, man, it's you and me.
Yep.
And there was a question that you texted me that I really, really loved, man. What are we going to be kind of like diving into today?
We're going to be talking about things we wish we would have known. Now, the reason why I think that's really important is for our viewers to know how old you are. So that I know that, you know, you are older than most of our viewers, listeners.
Yeah.
You're older than most listeners.
I was born in the Depression.
You were.
Yeah.
You were. So I want to know
but
from
I look
you.
Great.
But you do look great. You do look great. I want to know from you, what are the things in hindsight you wish you would have known? Like as an artist, as a father, as a businessman, like what are the key things that kind of resonate to you that when you look back, you should have gone, I wish I would have known that at my age now, at your elderly seniority?
Well, that you wear diapers twice in life. I wish somebody would have told me.
Definitely not be admitting to that online, bro.
It's funny because when you texted me this question, it took me a second, but then it hit me. And this is something that I think I wish I would have known all across all the aspects of my life. And that is that it's okay to ask for help.
Yep.
I've thought back a lot on, we train actors. And so it causes me to reflect back on, my training, the culture that I was trained in, the thoughts that I had and the beliefs that I had about myself and the industry when I left school. And I can't help but think of the contrast all the time because the culture that we've created and that our faculty and our staff and our students have created is so radically different than how I was trained that I'm kind of hit by that reality all the time. I think the biggest mistake that I made in my career, and this has only hit me hard in the last couple of years, is that I stopped training. I stopped studying. I stopped training. In fact, I was prideful about it. I thought I was hot stuff because I went to Carnegie. I thought, I should never take vocal lessons again, or I don't need to, or whatever. I can kind of, I never thought I would coast. I was always a hard worker, but I honestly believed that I could just travel through my entire career without ever taking another class.
You can tell. Your performance in Jack Ryan was abysmal.
But my abs.
But your abs
for a 75-year-old man who was born in the Depression, I looked great.
Abs were even worse. That's the thing. No, that's good, bro. No, I think it's true. We just had our Shakespeare finals, and I sat down from the class, said, so what did you get out of this 15-week period? And some of the students were like, I wish I just would have had fun to start with and have permission to have fun.
Yep.
And you could tell when they started to enjoy their pieces, it came alive. There was that je ne sais quoi that every single actor is looking for. Je ne sais quoi. And I think that is something that I found really good. It's funny you talk about continuous training because the thing is, we feel that once we've got to the end of our training stops. But one thing I love about you is you say you didn't continue training as an actor, but you worked enough that the training was on the job.
Yeah. And I listen, I think it's a fair and valid point. Sometimes when you're in LA, part of it was hubris and pride on my part and kind of being punkish and because of where I trained or whatever. I thought I was hot stuff, and it is a legitimately good school, but it would be like an athlete. In retrospect, it's like an athlete saying, well, I worked out yesterday, so I'm good, right? And now what training looks like when you're a working professional. I guess if you're a film star, you have your coach on set and you're working privately. I don't know. I think I got comfortable. I think I got comfortable doing television stuff. We had a British teacher who I've mentioned to you in the past who would always ridicule American actors as behavioralists. Now, there's a truth to the fact that when you're on camera, it's definitely a different muscle set. A lot of the technique is the same, but there's a different muscle set required for stage, certainly for Shakespeare or Chekhov or something like that. It's just complicated material as compared to like a walk and talk in, a legal drama or something.
Which is still complicated. Still requires an element of technique. Finesse and technique and nuance,
For sure. But I think maybe it's just that I developed that muscle and I let other muscles atrophy. Maybe that's the way.
Yeah, but I mean, you were very successful. I mean, the thing is as well, it's like, I remember when you were in Designated Survivor and there was a moment where you were speaking across the table from, remind me of the actress's name.
She was a British actress from, she worked with Jim Carrey as well. She's a brilliant British actress, but it was with Kiefer Sutherland. Her name will come to me.
Yeah, and but that scene, I remember you said the word no. I think there was a scene where you were the governor of Florida, right?
Yeah, they were asking me to basically say no to certain immigrants coming into the state.
Yeah, and I remember having that conversation with you. I was like, wow, that was really nuanced for such a small scene.
I worked hard. It's funny. I think Kiefer, I was a little bit intimidated. He's an imposing figure and he's good at what he does.
Short. He's taller than you though, right?
He's relentless. He's relentless on the height. But his heels, if you could see them, they're at least 3 inches. They're like Japanese businessman shoes. No, listen, he was an imposing figure. It was, there was some verbiage in the scene or whatever. So that scene, I knew that I wanted to show up and I wanted to do a good job. I actually did a little bit of character work and I studied, there's a Florida senator that I was kind of, homaging or whatever. But yeah, I think for me, vocally, technically, I wish I would have done more. That here's a confession. I don't know if you know this about me. I've never actually performed in a Shakespearean piece.
Oh, wow.
Never. Studied it, but just went to LA and it was just a muscle that I never flexed.
And there's not a ton of, I guess you have, I think there's a Shakespeare in the Park in LA, isn't there?
I auditioned for Shakespeare in the Park. I didn't get it. I forget which. It might have been Midsummer or Tempest or something like this. And it was actually with the famous director whose name is also escaping me now, who does a lot of the Shakespeare in the Park. He's a very famous New York producer. I auditioned for him, but didn't get it. Watching your students in the Shakespearean pieces that it was fast paced, it was contemporary, it was so well blocked that I was able to track. Shakespearean dialogue is not for the faint of heart. It can be complex if you're not familiar with it. Yeah. And even if you study it, it's like another language. But the physicality of the scenes that honestly, and I texted you this, it kind of made me hungry.
Yeah.
I was like, I think I want to do this, man. So well done on that. And that would be the answer to your question. Sir, when you look back, what's something you wish you would have known?
So my dad gave me a piece of advice that I wish I would have latched onto way earlier. And it's like, if you can learn from the mistakes of others, why make your own mistakes? So I was like, that's very, very, very wise.
I love your dad.
Now, I think it's something that I would always say, but I want to make my own mistakes.
Right.
And that doesn't mean necessarily moral failures or anything like that, but I wanted to experience those mistakes. And I think to some extent, curiosity will breed that in some ways, especially as an artist. But I think now what I've learned more than anything is that if I study the greats, whether that be in business, whether that be in fitness, whether that be in acting, why do I need to make the mistakes when people have gone before me, have made those mistakes, and now I can benefit from their life lessons so I don't have to go through them?
Yeah, listen, I think it's one thing to everyone's going to make mistakes, specifically if you're taking risks. And certainly if you're an artist, you're taking risks, which means you're going to make some kinds of mistakes along the way or not hit targets. It's one thing to make your own mistakes, things that you didn't know that you didn't know. It's another thing to see that someone has already made that mistake and then decide stubbornly. I'm guilty of the same thing, by the way.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think we all are, to be completely honest, aren't we?
Yeah. In terms of that's great wisdom there.
Yeah.
In terms of like family stuff, you mentioned like whether it's, there's so many of our artists that are asking the question, hey, can I love Jesus? Can I be in a deep and meaningful lifelong relationship and pursue art? In the quadrant or the space of like family and marriage, what do you wish you would have understood or known?
I think I remember, when you go to counseling they ask you to go back and look at, Little Fab and
I've got a couch.
Thank you. I do lay down on it. And I always used to find that really difficult.
Why?
To go back. I don't know. There was something about when I used to see myself in my mind's eye of going back to see me at 6 or 7, there was something kind of repugnant about it. And I don't know why.
Wow, that's a strong word.
Really strong. And I don't know what it was.
Huh.
But then I was driving home from men's group the other night, and the Lord said, I looked at that Little Fab and I said, I don't know why I have an aversion to wanting to kind of, don't want to say regress. It sounds like a hypnotic, hypnosis. Yeah. But like remembering back to that point, and it was a point when I was on the beach, and it was as if I was speaking to them, and I said, everything is going to be okay. And I think that from a family point of view, now that I'm nearly going to be an empty nester, I think I would parent from the point of view of enjoying every single moment, no matter how difficult it was, and go, they're not going to be here for long.
No.
So while you have them, you're just a custodian of your children.
Yeah.
Right. And I want to make sure that I enjoy every moment, no matter how hard, because time is fleeting. And if I could go back again, I would have approached the way I parented very different. And the same as an artist, I would embrace every single moment that I could, every audition. I would have sapped every single morsel out of that experience, and I would have just learnt from it.
It's funny. I don't know. I wonder sometimes if it's possible. First of all, I agree with you wholeheartedly. I sometimes wonder if, there's that old expression, youth is wasted on the young.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that, because you don't have the perspective. Somebody once told me something that really kind of blew my mind. And that is that the older that you get, the smaller proportionally 1 year is to you.
Because of your perspective of time.
Correct. I mean, when you're a 1-year-old, it's 100% of your life.
Exactly.
2, 50%, and so on. Now 1 year is 1/50th and decreasing, every day of my life. I think the other challenge too is when you're a working person, and in my case, your case, we had multiple kids. Day to day, it's sometimes hard to enjoy. I mean, here's a confession. One of the biggest blessings of my life, first and foremost, my 3 sons, and then we had an 8-year gap, and I had my daughter. I always dreamt and longed for a daughter. And we had 8 years, one oops, Talita Grace Neronia, and she's 7 years old. And sometimes she wants to do things, and at the end of a hard, long day of work, sometimes I've got nothing left in my tank. Now, just recently, I'm learning, really on point to what you're saying, to just say yes, even if I'm not feeling it.
Yeah.
Just say yes and get past it. And what I'm learning is, I know this is going to sound odd, and maybe it's a guy thing, it's a dad thing. I don't know. My wife just seems to have an unending tank when it comes to our kids. It's just this beautiful thing about her. But for me, I'm learning that if, like working out, if I just get going, then all of a sudden you step into a kind of enjoyment, a grace, if you will, we would say, to have the energy to be there for your kids. But I agree with you, bro. I've got 3 boys. One's 19, 17, 16 years old. I feel like I've got a nest, and I feel like, like the air, the air carriers, the big boats with the jets. I feel like I'm just launching them off now back to back.
It's a scary thought that the perspective of time really does change everything. Because you're right. I think that, you might have low energy because your test levels must be low. It comes with age.
You're just attacking my masculinity.
I'm just saying to you, bro, it's just your age.
Fab would like to have an entire podcast episode on testosterone levels, but we're going to save you from that. But
we'll save you from that.
Season 5.
Season 5. I don't know. I think that, it's easy. It's easier said in hindsight.
Yeah.
But the point is, the disciplines we put in place now, if we embrace them at a younger age, then
it becomes like a muscle.
It becomes like a muscle, man. It's a rhythm that you get into. And I'm not saying, I think one other thing as well, I think I lived with a lot of judgment throughout my life,
me too.
And understanding to not judge and to minimize my triggers, right, is something that enables me now to engage with people with a sense of empathy to an extent, because I wouldn't always say I've used the empathetic muscle that much.
Let me ask you something. Has life humbled you?
I think God has humbled me. I think life put me in a position where God needed to humble me.
That's fair.
You know what I mean?
I think over the last couple of years, I don't know. I think back to when before we had kids, I remember we would go over this couple's house, and they had kids and we didn't. And I had so many opinions about parenting.
Everybody has opinions, things they don't know.
When you're not married, you have opinions about marriage. When you don't have kids, you have opinions about kids. And then I'll tell you what else too. Like, and here's the deal. Listen, teenage years can be beautiful and brutal. I think they're beautiful and brutal in a way that's unique to when they're little. When they're little, man, you can pick them up. They say, "Come with me to the store." They can whine, they cry. When you get to teenage years, there's a unique sense of no and powerlessness that you start to face off with and then your kids make choices. And I think what God's taken me on a journey on, and this is something that I've slowly been humbled and learning, is that the Lord, whenever I had a complaint or a fear about my child, he's been taking me back to things that I didn't said.
Yeah.
Horrendous things that I didn't said. I still remember my stepmom, Myra. I came home from college and I was 19 years old. I had taken a couple college classes, so I was really smart, I thought. And I remember we got into an argument and I started psychoanalyzing her at 19. The gall. Can you imagine? So when I've had challenges with my kids now, the Lord's like, hey, let's take a little trip.
Yeah. Do you remember? Let's go down memory lane. Do you remember that moment when you psychoanalyzed your stepmom?
Oh, it's so embarrassing. Honestly,
it is.
It's embarrassing.
It's embarrassing, but I think, look, youth is wasted on the young, but it's that exploration phase of where they are really—
You're learning to be human.
They're learning to be human. They are butting up against boundaries. They're trying to find out who they are. And I think, it's not just as humans. I mean, as artists as well, throw the artist into the mix.
Yeah.
And, it's a case of, our artists aren't just psychoanalyzing other people, they're psychoanalyzing themselves.
No, I think that's what's so different about our culture. I'll tell you, there's a ton of things, a whole litany of things. As deep as we went on technique, there was a whole part of my soul that I had no concept or understanding of after training at my school. So sometimes when I think to myself, my gosh, why are artists not struggling in any bad way, and then I realize after talking to our pastoral staff, Ella and others, I realize that when you go as deep tissue and when you have the Lord, there's just things that you can't hide.
No.
And if as an artist, not only are you studying art and being vulnerable in front of people, but then you're also being required to be without shame, completely vulnerable, honest about your secrets and your shortcomings. Oh yeah, man. I mean, I have so much more empathy and compassion now for our artists. And I have to be honest, I haven't gone through the process they're going through.
Yeah. And I think as well though, but when you involve the Lord, he accelerates the process.
100%.
So when you have that ability and you have that, that framework that we have at BCA, that we have pastoral staff that you can talk to, that you can
you imagine having that at conservatory?
My gosh, it would have, I mean,
game changer, right?
Our conservatories, they weren't Christian conservatories.
No.
So it may have been different, but it would have still been helpful.
Oh, 100%.
To have been able to process what emotions am I going through? Why am I feeling this? Just having somebody that's further down the line than you, but having our pastoral staff who are actually artists as well, I think it really, it's a bonus to these artists that we're.
So I think what we're saying right now is that what we wish, maybe not we would have known, but we would have had, because I didn't have this. I had a group of friends. I don't know that I would have used the word community in the way that we use it. I don't know that I was in honest, vulnerable, accountable, deep enough relationship with the people around me to be honest about the things that were tormenting me, like super painful.
But you have to create an environment that fosters that.
No, that has to be a culture. And culture is created with leadership and the people who participate.
Yeah, it really does. Otherwise, if you don't then feel, you don't feel safe to be able to communicate that. If you just don't know who you're communicating with, I mean, okay, sometimes you have a therapist, that's their job. You feel you feel comfortable with them, because just a byproduct, because they're professionals in their industry, that you have some level of trust built. But I mean, I think with our environment, the culture that's so unique is the fact that it's safe from the get-go. Might not feel safe, but just because it doesn't feel safe doesn't mean it's not safe.
That's a good distinction, because we use this word a lot in our environment, and I think it's a good word to use both at Bethel and at BCA. But I would agree with you wholeheartedly. I don't think you're going to feel, if by safe you mean not vulnerable, those two things are not the same.
No.
You can be vulnerable and in an unsafe environment. You can be vulnerable and in a safe environment. The distinction there are the people that you're around, that they've got your back. They're not going to attack you. They're not going to use anything that you divulge or any of your failings or shortcomings or mistakes in that vulnerable place against you. That's for me, the distinction between safe and unsafe. But vulnerability never feels good. I don't know. I mean, it's unusual for me to be like, oh yeah, this feels great.
Yeah. I mean, I guess it depends the level of vulnerability you're willing to go to. But I think once you engage with vulnerability, I think it's hard to go back.
You know what? That's a really good point.
You know,
listen, one last thing before we wrap up, and I know this is essential to our thing, but I'd be remiss to not mention it. And I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this. And I'll make this one short. I wish I would have known that the job was not me, that the job did not define my value or my worth. How about you?
I think that because we're so passionate as artists, I always felt that becoming an actor was a call.
Yeah.
Right. I really did. I really thought it was a call. So I think when my identity was wrapped up in what I did, not who I was, it really felt like a letdown. I wasn't good enough. I'd use that kind of metric to judge myself as a human. But I think knowing now that if it's a portfolio life, you can work as a barman and still be in class because you're studying humanity.
Because you love it.
Pardon?
Because you love it.
Because you love it. You know what I mean? So there are something, you've got to look at the journey. And I think one thing I wish I would have known is, it's not about just getting that next job. It's about embracing the journey.
Your life. Your total. It's funny. I think back now, and if I had any places of regret, it's similar to what you would have said. I wish I would have known that this was a marathon, not a sprint. I wish I would have known that in between gigs when you're unemployed, because invariably as an artist, there will be gaps of employment.
Of course.
Go to the park with your kids. Have a Kool-Aid, have a lemonade, have a picnic, take your wife out for a movie or the drive or whatever. Like, suck the marrow out of life.
Yeah.
I used to have a dog named Scully, named after the redhead Gillian Anderson from the X-Files, although it was a big male dog, the red hair on it. Anyway, I'd walk around and I'd fester and I'd ruminate and I'd worry. And I think back now and I'm like, I wasted
so much time. And 99% of what you worry about never happens.
Oh, well, first of all, it never accomplished anything. It was magical.
Yeah.
My worrying never translated financially into my bank account. Isn't that strange?
Yeah.
It never earned me any money.
No. I don't think it serves you either. It just gives you higher blood pressure at your age.
Brother, thanks for...
I don't know if everybody's noticed.
Right to the end.
We've moved
right to the end with the digs.
Through line.
You're an ageist. Yeah. You know this? You're an ageist.
We've moved to a new studio.
We have.
Look at it. Isn't it cool?
Smoking.
You won't hear the motorbikes in the background anymore, or the roundabout at Costco, or
yeah, we had to use artificial intelligence to strip out all kinds of vehicles and bombs and things that were happening in what I playfully called the circle of death. It was right after we built our last studio. It turns out that was literally a roundabout in all of Reading. In the UK, there's a million roundabouts. Here, we first of all, we don't have them and we don't know how to drive around them. So you don't know this, but there would literally be car accidents happening.
During an episode.
Yeah. Anyways, thanks for hanging out with us. We hope that delving into the depth that is Fabiano Altamura has been a blessing to you. We'll see you soon.
Bless you.